Namaste, everyone. A very warm good morning. We all remember our childhoods. The one feeling that goes with it is happiness. For most of us, regardless of how or where we've spent it, it's a time of great happiness and joy. As children, we just know how to be happy. We build those sand castles, adorn it with flowers for hours on end. And at the end of it, we leave feeling calm and fulfilled, almost smug, like we've done the greatest thing in the world. What is truly strange is that as children, we are always dreaming about becoming adults. We somehow feel that as adults, we'll have the power to do much more, to create much more than as children. And yet, when we finally become adults, and are able to do all the things we dreamt as children, times just aren't happy anymore. Many would say, oh, the strain of responsibility becomes so great that there's no time to do things I really want to do. And yet, there are many amongst us, and in the course of history, there have always been those who have preserved this childlike joy to the end of their lives in the face of all responsibilities and tribulations that life has presented them. What is it, that one thing that makes our childhoods so happy and fulfilling? At this point, I would like to tell you a story which the mother told the children of the ashram many times. The story of creation. The story of how the four divine beings emanated from the Supreme in the beginning. These beings were consciousness in light, bliss, truth, and life, what we call Sat, Chit, Ananda, and Supermind. After deciding to exist independently from the Supreme, they fell into conditions which were quite opposite of their original state. Light turned into complete darkness or ignorance, bliss turned into suffering, truth into falsehood, and Sat or life turned into death. It was so chaotic and so dark that nobody dared to come and heal it. And therefore, the Supreme Mother, Aditi herself, delegated out of herself this force of love which plunged into the darkness of this first creation. In the Agni, this is called, in the Vedas, it is called the Agni, the divine will, the first avatar, the immortal among mortals, who hid himself within this darkness. And it is because of this presence that everything evolves and seeks after the highest knowledge of the Supreme. The process of evolution was thus set in motion. Agni, or the divine will, or the power of love, that set this process of evolution through an eternal becoming, is what we call progress. This evolution has led us from matter to life, from life to mind, and has now brought us to this state of human beings having come to earth so that we can now participate consciously in this evolution. And this participation, this progress, is the purpose of creation. And since we are part of this creation, there cannot be any other aim than to participate in this progress. Therefore, Mother says that progress is the sign of the divine influence in creation. It is inbuilt in the scheme of things. Progress is inbuilt. Now, progress, if you look at the word etymologically, comes from two Latin words, progredi, which is to go forward, or in Sanskrit, we say pragati, to go forward. And this progress can be many things for many people. For a sprinter, it can be clocking a few seconds less than he did in the previous previous race. For an Odissi dancer, it can be to choreograph new things or perform, learn new dances. For an innovator, it could be finding new solutions to existing problems. For an entrepreneur, it could be the next business idea that he wants to bring down upon earth to make human life better. So any goal setting, anything we set our goals for and achieve it is what we can define as progress, because it is this moving forward. Going for an extra run and running that extra mile today than you did yesterday is also progress. Now, how do we know what we have to progress, where we have to progress? So when we start living consciously with more awareness, we find that life is an adventure. Adventure gives us new situations which we learn to overcome, and that is what makes adventure interesting. We all seek adventures from time to time as holiday or vacations. But when we start living consciously, life itself becomes adventure. Each moment becomes an occasion for a new learning. Because as Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, this world was not built by random bricks of chance. There's a meaning in each curve and line. So this wider intelligence kind of arranges the circumstances of our life so that we are faced with situations and circumstances that help us to grow. It could be a visit to an art gallery where you feel inspired and to take up art that you've never done in your life before. It could be you moving to a new city where for the first time you have to learn how to cook because you've never cooked before. Or it could be any new situation that life throws at you. And when we start living consciously and with full awareness, we begin to see that every moment that life offers us becomes a moment of this progress. And without progress, what happens? Without progress, there is stagnation. And stagnation is death, because nothing seems to inspire us. This is a state of boredom. When mother says that, when we say that I'm bored, right below it, that it's because I'm not progressing. Because in the state of progressing, we are never bored. Sometimes we can be really in a situation which is very contrary to progress. It may be a very difficult circumstance. And yet, if this will to progress is alive in us, then the initial power of love that came down to aid evolution is always there within us, that helps us to find a new path and to find a new opportunity so that we can grow. This love for life, which is the cornerstone of this progress, is built into this whole scheme of things. You all must be knowing J.K. Rowling. She was famous for her Harry Potter fantasy series. In fact, it was her birthday yesterday. And this series has sold more than 500 million copies. It is any author's biggest dream. She's the best-selling author of all times. And yesterday, as I said, was her 55th birthday. But she may not have lived to see it in 1993, 27 years ago, when considering herself as a failure, she was contemplating to end her life. Her marriage with an abusive husband had failed. She was without a job, had a dependent child. Her mother had just died from multiple sclerosis, and she was herself diagnosed with clinical depression. But something in her inspired to take up a book that she had started writing several years ago. She would take her child in a pram so that the child falls asleep, into a cafe where she would sit down and start writing. And all of us who have been writers would know that whenever we write a passage or any poem, it has a very fulfilling effect on us. So that kept her going. And In 1995, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published. And today, Rowling is one of the richest women in the world. She denies rumors of being a billionaire because she says she has donated half of her wealth to charity. But more important than that, she kickstarted the reading habit in children and young adults, which was dwindling. So, the other truth of the matter is that when we are genuinely in the state of flow and progress, we naturally contribute to the larger world as well. So, in this case, J.K. Rowling restored her physical and mental health through progressing, and here the means of progress was creative output. Let us take another example. We know that during Treta Yuga, thousands of years ago, there was a man called Ratnakar who lived in the forests along the banks of river Ganges. Ratnakar was a very cruel hunter and a fearless thief. Everybody feared him. It is said that when he walked in the forest, even the birds would fly to their nests and animals would find a place to hide. One day when Ratnakar was hiding in the forest looking for a victim, the great sage Narada walked past peacefully, admiring the beauty of the forest and singing the kirtans in praise of God. Ratnakar jumped out in front of him and demanded, "Hand all that you have, please hand over." With love flowing from his eyes, Narad smiled and said, "I have all these rags that I'm wearing. If you want them, you can take them." So Narad's fearlessness surprised Ratnakar. When he gazed into Narad's eyes, his cruelty melted. Narad saw this transformation and lovingly explained to Ratnakar how this stealing and killing of animals was sinful. He reminded that how, though his family is eager to share the fruits of his bad actions, they would not share his sins. So upon this realization, Ratnakar fell to Narad's feet and asked for forgiveness. And then we know that he chanted Ram for so many years that ant hills grew over him. And that is what and how Narad said that from now on you would be called a Valmiki or an ant hill. And with tears in his eyes, Sage Valmiki began his new life. He built an ashram near that river Ganga, and that is where he composed Ramayana. And Sri Aurobindo places Valmiki along with Shakespeare and Homer as one of the finest poets and writers the world has ever seen. So progress for Valmiki in this case was through an inner change of attitude. Progress is that inflection point when there is an irreversible and fundamental shift of consciousness that happens in us. And this shift of consciousness is towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. So any progress, any goal that we set to better ourselves and achieve it can be termed progress. But what is progress for those of us who wish and who seek the divine? Mother has said that true progress is to come close to the divine. Therefore, she says that to progress, we need these two parallel movements simultaneously. The outer movement of progress and the inner movement of progress. What we have discussed till now is this outer progress where we perfect our instruments. We perfect our mind, our life, our body, the various skills that are needed to execute or to live better in this world. And yet, there is an inner progress, another parallel movement that Mother talks about. And she says that the other parallel movement is that the offering of all we do to the divine. So on one hand, the perfection of the instruments, which we all ordinarily understand as progress, to do better today than we did yesterday in the matters of the body, sports, fitness, in the matters of the emotions, in the matters of the mind, in various skills. And yet this is incomplete if it is not combined with the second movement of offering all that we do to a higher principle in us. Otherwise, the progress becomes a sacrifice to the lower principle of ego and desire within us, and which may be okay if one wants some human perfection. But if we want to become true instruments in the hands of the divine, the second movement becomes very important. And Sri Aurobindo beautifully takes us through the three stages of this movement of surrender. The first is when we think of ourselves as a worker. We are aware that we have been created for the divine, and whatever we do is done for her. We look for inspiration from the divine. So there's no stress or anxiety because we are doing nothing for ourselves, but for the divine. We do not expect any fruits or rewards. The only fruit and reward is the joy of service or the joy of inner progress. We hand over everything to the higher divine power. And this is the first step where we have become a divine worker. And when we keep this attitude, slowly we realize that actually it is the divine Shakti that is doing everything through us, through all our ideas, all that we do comes from her. We are just the conduits. So it is not just what we need to do that we depend on the divine for, but also how we need to do it. And we see that very interestingly, new powers which did not exist before, new skills that did not exist earlier, begin to develop in us. And this is when we have moved to the second stage of becoming the instrument in the hands of the divine. And finally, Sri Aurobindo says that we become a child of the divine when the surrender is complete, when we have become one with the divine will. We freely, we are like carried, as it were, fully protected, taken care of, and we become a portion of the Divine Mother. So these two parallel movements of inner progress and outer progress is needed for those who aspire for a divine life, because otherwise these two knots of ego and desire may come in the way of a full expression of the divine Shakti through the instrumentation of the human. And the beauty of this is that we have all that we need for doing this, because the material that we need to do this is ourselves, and nobody can take it away from us. When Sri Aurobindo was in the Alipur jail, he realized Krishna. The jail, which is the highest form of restriction, did not stop this progress. So we have ourselves, all our faculties of consciousness, all the potentialities that lay hidden with us. We are born with it. And there's a purpose that we are born with certain potentiality and certain skills to develop it in a certain way. And the other beautiful thing is we have this entire life to work on it. It is a lifelong process. It is there from the time we get up in the morning to the time we sleep, and even during sleep. We can learn how to make sleep conscious. So we have this entire entire field given to us, right from the time we are born and forever, to be going on this path of progress, the outer progress and the inner progress. It is therefore not surprising that the mother, when she spoke about progress in the context of the 12 qualities, courage and progress have a very important place. And if you see in these 12 qualities which are necessary for the new creation, these are the psychic qualities, the qualities that we all need to develop to participate in the new world, in the new creation. And progress is one of them. If you look at this image carefully, we see that progress forms the part of Mahakali. It is the strength of the power of the soul which corresponds to strength. Mahakali, as we know, is the power of the Divine Mother which enables the swiftness of progress. It helps us in shattering of all the limitations, of all the obstacles, so that we can move forward in this path of progress. In addition to these 12 qualities, the mother also spoke about the 12 gardens. These gardens are what the mother says, these are the 12 powers of the mother necessary to manifest her work. Sri Aurobindo says these are the 12 powers of vibration that are necessary for complete manifestation. And if we go through this list again, we see that the only power that is common to the psychic qualities, the soul qualities that we have to develop, and the qualities from above, the powers of the mother from above that will help in this new creation, is progress. So this set me thinking that it is really a quality that we need both for that aspiration from below and the grace from above that answers. What is common to both is progress. At this stage, I would like to play a small recording for you. So we all know the story of Beethoven. We know that at a certain point in life, when he was full of this music that he had to create, he realizes that he is going deaf. And he reaches a point where, like J.K. Rowling, we discussed earlier, he feels himself so limited that the very faculty he needs to create music, the faculty of hearing, he is losing it. And he decides to end his life. And this is the letter that he writes to his brothers. And we will see what happens afterwards.
For my brothers, Carl and Johann Beethoven. Oh, ye men who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do you wrong me. You do not know the secret causes of my seeming so. From childhood, my heart and mind were disposed to the gentle feelings of goodwill. I was ever eager to accomplish great deeds. But reflect now that for 6 years I have been a hopeless case, aggravated by senseless physicians, cheated year after year in the hope of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady. I was born with an ardent and lively temperament, susceptible to the diversions of society. Yet, I was compelled early to isolate myself, to live in loneliness. And when at times I tried to forget all this, oh, how harshly was I repulsed by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing. And yet it was impossible for me to say to men, speak louder, Shout, for I am deaf. Ah, how could I possibly admit such an infirmity in the one sense which should have been more perfect in me than in others? A sense which I once possessed in the highest perfection, a perfection such as few surely in my profession enjoy or ever have enjoyed. Therefore forgive me when you see me draw back, when I would gladly mingle with you. My misfortune is doubly painful because it must lead to my being misunderstood. For me there can be no recreation in society of my fellows, or refined conversation, mutual exchange of thought. Yet, come when thou will, and I shall meet thee bravely. Farewell, and do not wholly forget me when I am dead. Ludwig van Beethoven, October 6th, 1802. Yet, despite this breakdown, Beethoven soon regained his composure and became more confident than ever that God had placed him on this earth to compose music. And so he did, relentlessly for the decades to come. And it was in his music that he found a fulfilling expression of his journey from anguish to triumph. Perhaps the most celebrated example of this is his famous Fifth Symphony, where the first movement starts in one of his darker keys of C minor, an expression of his pain and anxiety. It resolves in the emphatic C major, a symbol of Beethoven's audacity and perseverance. Moreover, his Ninth Symphony, which today is the anthem for the European Union, preaches global and universal brotherhood, setting Schiller's famous poem, An die Freude, to music in an ode to joy. That a man who struggled for so much of his life with anxiety and depression could find meaning and joy and set it to the greatest music the world had ever seen is only a symbol of the immense healing that one can feel and the immense bliss one can bring to one's life just by never stopping in one's progress.
So that was Beethoven, and it was put together by my son. That was his voiceover, Aryan. And I'm sorry, just give me a minute. So I find this so motivating, and I find it so beautiful that human spirit can overcome so much, because it always aspires for the truth, for beauty, for something that takes him closer to that reality. Therefore, healing cannot happen by just outer and physical means alone. By the way, Beethoven, mother had spoken very highly of the Ninth Symphony, and she had said that in this, Beethoven had the vision of an opening into a higher world, and he had brought the descent of that higher world to this earthly plane. So I would like to summarize by saying that healing cannot happen by just outer and physical means alone. Today, we haven't been more advanced in medical science than we were ever before. In the last 200 years, the life expectancy has been doubled. We have pills which can reverse from cholesterol to insulin to creatinine, and there are artificial machines which can keep the lungs and hearts working, and even after that, if they fail, there is transplant available that one can have new organs. And yet, in these very times, there has never been so much a talk of also the need of healing. It's because healing is not just outer and physical. Though the psychosomatic causes of physical health have been adequately researched, our psychology affects our health no less than our physical factors. And that is where the importance of progress comes. Mother says that we are on earth to progress. The purpose of earthly life is progress. That is the purpose of our lives. And living this purpose brings joy and fulfillment. It fills us with meaning. In its baby steps, medical science is trying to find out about all these happy hormones, they call it, the happy chemicals that the body releases, and it is the acronym DOSE of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, which are released when the body is happy. So health is an outer expression of an inner harmony. And this harmony can only be achieved when we are living the purpose of our life. The purpose of our life is to progress. Therefore, healing becomes a natural consequence of this progress. To go back to Beethoven, I would like to point out that when we progress, we naturally create some new progressive thing for the world. We help the whole world to progress. And even if it is not something that we create, but let's say I master this movement of anger within me. This progress also helps the whole world because it makes it easier for everybody else to master that movement of anger. So the best contribution we can do to ourselves and to the world is to keep progressing. And when Mother created Auroville, as she says, the cradle for a new civilization, she says that Auroville will be a place of unending education, of constant progress, and a youth that never ages. Because when we are constantly progressing, we stop growing old. Youth is not a function of age as much as it is this will to grow and to learn. And because health is an expression of an inner harmony of mind, life, and body, and through progress, we progressively work at harmonizing this inner world of ours. The natural consequence of that is health and healing outside. Now we know that why we were always happy as kids, because we were always progressing and learning. So whenever we are unsure, let us remember that feeling of joy and growth from our childhoods, and the feeling of being a child once again, full of curiosity, full of wanting to progress. And that will be the ultimate compass. In the words of H.W. Longfellow, "Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest," was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow find us farther than today. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. And in the words of the Mother, give up all personal seeking for comfort, satisfaction, enjoyment, or happiness. Be only a fire, a burning fire for progress. Take whatever comes to you as an aid to your progress, and immediately make whatever progress is required. That is the only way to remain always young. That is the only way to align ourselves with the purpose of creation. And that's the only way to remain healthy and happy. Thank you. We will now take up some questions if there are. I would be very happy to share.
Thank you, Gitanjali ji, for that lovely introduction and talk about how progress helps us in healing. We have a question from one of the attendees. They want to know how to deal with this uncontrollable fear that seizes us sometimes,
Yes.
and how we can channelize that and move that towards progress.
Yes. So identifying our fear and overcoming them is a part of our emotional education. And the first thing about fear is that courage is not the lack of fear. It is human to have all the fears, but courage is the overcoming of it. So I'll just tell you a practical thing that I do about my fears. So I identify a fear every year, let's say, and work on it. Just face it. For instance, I was afraid of heights. So I decided to do skydiving because there cannot be anything more fearful than skydiving. So went to, in New Zealand, and from that 30,000 feet, the moment before I was going to skydive, I felt that I had overcome fear. So just to, catch it by the neck and to face it. I was also very afraid of cold. I used to feel cold even in Chennai in the winters. So when this opportunity came to set up this university in Ladakh, where it is -30 in winters, one of the reasons I took it up was also to, overcome that fear of -30. Usually, we would give up an opportunity like that, and that is why I call life an adventure. Because what is an adventure? It helps you enlarge your comfort zone. So every fear is just telling you that this is what your limitation are. This is your comfort zone. So if we look at fear as an opportunity, life is giving us to widen that comfort zone. And by overcoming it, we kind of enlarge our field of action, then take fear as a friend to be befriended. Another example is that I used to be very afraid of dogs. So when I learned karate and became a black belt, one of the things I learned was that the inner nervous system had become so strong that now when a dog comes charging at me, I can just sit down and hold it like that. So facing one's fears is the way to overcome them. Having this meta affection and metacognition, the self-awareness, ability to see what our fears are, and then to rationally, work towards them, to understand that this is just a limitation of my ego, and it has come to me to help me to enlarge my field of action.
Yeah, thank you. We have a very similar question with respect to grief and how we can use grief as a channel towards progress.
Yes. All these dualities, the dvandvas, we call it, of happiness and sorrow, light and darkness, liking and disliking. These are all the parts of our nature, which is the gunas, and which have partial truth. So these dualities are not complete truth. They are both partial truth. So the practice of equality, of equanimity, is considered and advised as the first step towards any spiritual preparation. And it is because of this that the two things that we have to work upon is the ego and desire. So ego has its base in the mind, in the buddhi, and desire in the prana. So the two very simple practices that help in these two is equanimity and remember and offer. So when we remember and offer at every moment, we are not in the front as the doers, we are not driven by this desire heart. We slowly move backward into what we call the psychic heart. And that has the ability to see and to witness everything that goes on. And we can see that for every grief, there is a joy. For every, dislike, there is a like. And how these are phenomenal, how they come and go. And therefore, the reality, the truth, is something which is beyond that. So the remember and offer is one way to deal with grief. And also grief is linked with attachment, which has its root in ego. So practice of equanimity. These are the two. I was very close to Amal Kiran, K.D. Setna, and as a youngster, when I was 16, I asked him that what is the mantra for integral yoga? And he gave me these two, equanimity and remember and offer. It seemed to me at that point a super abridged version of Sri Aurobindo's yoga, but now when I read the synthesis more and more, and I find out that it is this ego and desire, the two knots in the lower hemisphere of mind, life, and body that we are dealing with, these two practices can help us.
You had spoken about inner harmony and the stages of surrender. Can you elaborate a bit more about it?
Yes. So, in the Puranas, we have these the Asuras and the Devas. The Asuras are also Vedic scholars like Ravana. So why are they still Asuras and not, they are not in the side of the truth? The simple thing which differentiates both is that who are we offering our perfection to? Are we offering our perfection to ego and desire, which are the representatives of the divisive, the Asuric consciousness? Or are we offering our perfection to the growth of divinity in the world? And towards that end, Mother says that while perfecting our instruments, like becoming a better pianist every day or becoming a better writer every day is important, that is perfecting of our instruments. But at the same time, we need to constantly keep offering this progress to something higher in us, to the higher powers. And this, the Sri Aurobindo in the 5th chapter of The Mother elaborates, goes through 3 stages. The first stage is when we consider ourselves a worker, a divine worker. We don't do things for ourselves. We say that the work that we do is given to us by the divine. And we take inspiration for the divine. We are not bothered about the fruit of our action because it is not a personal, we are not in it for any personal gain or benefit. So the first thing is the consciousness or of a worker. The second is of an instrument. What does a sword do in your hands as a warrior? The sword, it surrenders itself completely to be used by the user. Or a violin. If a violin had its own, tone, or if the sword refused to work in the hands of the kshatriya, then the kshatriya or the musician cannot do what they have to do. So when we allow ourselves to become instruments in the hands of the higher power, the divine Shakti, the divine mother, that is the second stage where we are the instrument. So we've moved closer to when we were the worker and we become the instrument. And yet we have not become one with the mother. So the third stage is when we become the child of the divine mother. So it's complete identification. We become a part of her. And yes, right now, these are more of mental ideas for us, but as we keep progressing, we can start understanding it experientially.
Okay. We have a question about ageism in today's society.
What ism?
Ageism, where we are constantly told that we are too old to do something, or in such an environment, how do we ensure as we grow older that we have the interest and the energy to progress?
Yeah. So again, I'll give you from my personal example that when I read in the Mother and Sri Aurobindo's works that aging is just a myth. Growing old is a myth. As long as we progress, we continue to stay young. So age is not a matter of physical number of years spent, but when you stop growing, stop progressing, one grows old. So believing that we can do anything at any point in our lives is the starting point. And I wanted to experiment this when I was 35 and when I had a son who was 5 years old. I thought, let us try this. So the most difficult thing I took up, which was Russian ballet. Russian ballet is something that you start at the age of 3 and you retire at the age of 33. So when I went to Ukraine, to Kyiv, to study ballet, my teacher, she said, you must be kidding. At your age, ballerinas retire. And I don't want to waste my time with you because you will never perform on stage. You can never, your time is over. And I told her that in India, we do not dance to perform on stage. We dance for our perfection. And also in India, we don't believe that age exists because our dancers, Kelucharan Mahapatra, who was my teacher for a short while, he danced into his 80s. And we have cases where Japanese women and men have become black belts at the age of 90. So I told her that in Asia, we don't believe in this concept of age, and you start teaching me and you will change your views about age. And she took me on, and at the age of 35, I started learning ballet. And I went on to dancing on my point shoes. And I also performed Snow White on stage. So mother calls it the atavism, just as we have our conscious being, we have a superconscient and a subconscient, which is universal. So this idea of aging and death is there in the subconscient for thousands of years. And this keeps coming up through our chitta, through these suggestions that we are old and we cannot do anymore. But you just have to use your conscious mind, and you have to use the highest tool, which is the mind. And if the mother has said that there's nothing called aging, and at any age you can learn anything, so you have to tell that part that is telling you are aging, and over a period of time you will see that you will be able to do things which has no relevance to age.
Thank you so much, Geetanjali ji. It was a very illuminating discussion, especially for me, and I'm sure for all the other attendees. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to this session. Thank you, Sampath and James, for inviting me.